I'd like to introduce Jen Lucky. We're no pun intended,
I'm
very
so-
lucky, not
Aw.
to say fortunate, to have her. She's one of the rising young stars, I'm going to call you that.
Oh, thank you,
In the
Sandy.
public health department. She was working on immigration issues prior to her involvement in Voting Matters. So I will let her talk about why voting matters to our community.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm really honored to be invited here to this meeting today. So, oh yeah, please. Thank you for having me. As Sandy mentioned, I work for the Public Health Department and I coordinate a program called Voting Matters. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the program and then just talk about voting in Alameda County. And then I have some information about voting in the disability community, and I would love to answer any questions that you have during or after the presentation. So the program, just really briefly, that I coordinate is aims to engage voters throughout Alameda County, but we have a unique way of doing it. We work with staff in our department and the Healthcare Services Agency, try to get them to have conversations with clients and with people they have trusted relationships within the community. And then we also work with leaders and advocates like yourself, again, to try to talk to you about voting, and then you're the ones who have a lot of influence in the community, and I think you have a really important role in helping to engage voters. And I probably don't need to, tell you all of this, but voting is obviously really important, and it's very connected to health. Just to go over a couple of reasons why. I mean, voting directly impacts the conditions that we live in. So our housing conditions, we vote on policies that affect transportation and education and everything in between. So whether you vote on the policies or not, we're all affected by those policies. And I'll talk in a little bit about who votes and who doesn't vote, typically in our county and in our state. But voting has kind of a bigger role as well. Voting engagement can actually help to address some of the inequalities in our state and our county. So while when people vote, they're actually able to build power, political power and social power, and that's something that's really important to do. Unfortunately, while we have a vision of making our county healthy and equitable for everybody, we're just not there yet. So the more that we can do to address inequities, like address the disparities in voting, the better chance we have of creating a healthy space for everybody. And then I know that voting is one step towards getting our communities civically engaged, and that's kind of a hard step to take, especially when people are just dealing with a lot in their lives, maybe facing a lot of barriers to getting engaged in their communities. Voting could be one thing that someone could do that may lead to a next step and help them engage civically. So just a little background, I think voting is a two-step process. So first you have to register to vote, make sure that you're eligible. And then even if we work so hard on voter registration, you have to get people to get out and vote. So both of the steps actually take quite a bit of effort. And then just to go over eligibility, in order to vote, you have to be a U.S. citizen. If you want to vote in Alameda County, you have to be a resident of Alameda County. You have to be 18 years old by election day. This year, 16 and 17-year-olds can register to vote, but they can't vote until they're 18. They can pre-register, sorry. You can't be currently in prison or on parole for a felony conviction, but having a criminal history doesn't bar you from having rights to vote. And so anyone with a misdemeanor, serving a jail sentence, if you're finished serving a felony sentence, if you're finished with parole and on probation, your voting rights are not affected, and it is your right to vote. So that's also important to keep in mind. And then lastly, you could not be under conservatorship where a court has ruled that you're not allowed to vote. And we do have some information about voting and conservatorship if folks have questions about that. So stepping back, just looking at our state overall, who votes and who doesn't vote. So out of 30 million adults in our state, about 24 million adults are eligible to vote, but only 17 million of those adults are actually registered to vote. And that leaves about over 6 million eligible voters who are unregistered in our state. And that puts our state actually really low in the rankings when we look at voter registration rates. And even when I look at voter turnout rates, I was surprised when I learned these rankings and statistics because California has such a reputation of being very political and very active. So we have a lot of people in our state. I think we could do a better job of ensuring that the people who are voting on policies actually represent the communities on the ground. And it just to that end, the voters that typically turn out, and this is just kind of like in general, there's always places that buck the trend, but tend to be older voters, tend to be homeowners, tend to be wealthier, tend more to be white. And then those who are less likely to vote tend to be renters, more likely to be Latino, less likely to have a college education. And so, again, what we have is the people who tend to vote for the policies that affect all of us don't necessarily represent accurately the populations on the ground. And then the bar graph here is voter turnout in Alameda County. And I think this just highlights, when I said before, that two-step process. Even if we work so hard to register voters, you can see the blue line is the registered voters, and then the yellow is who turned out to vote. So we're still missing a big portion of folks who they're registered, but they're facing barriers and actually not getting out to cast their ballot.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Are you breaking down those statistics in terms of who votes as an absentee versus who actually goes to a polling place?
No, that's just overall. So I think more and more people are voting by mail, and that's an option that we could talk about. No, that's just kind of who turns in a ballot. We're not even looking at the polls. And again, I think that there's more and more of a kind of a push and an opportunity to use voting by mail. Yes?
The 6.6 million, have they, what area throughout California is that most populated where people are not registered to voting? Has it been, is it in Southern California, in the rural areas where it's hard to get to a polling place? Have they done that study to see exactly where those 6 million people are living?
That's a really good question. I don't know geographically. I do know that in terms of low voter registration rates, the lowest are among Asian American and Latinx populations, particularly naturalized citizens and their children have low voter registration rates, and also young people, like ages 18 to 24. And so I think that shows us that there are particular barriers for those populations, and we need to think about that. I'll show you a slide. I'll jump ahead and then I'll go back. One of the reasons why that's important to think about the demographics of who's registering and who isn't is to think about how our county and our state is changing demographically. There's a huge projected growth in voting age population of Asian populations and Latinx populations. And so the demographics of our county is really changing. And if voters don't represent that change, then that can be an issue. But if we really are able to engage everyone in to reflect that demographic change, I think we could see big political changes as well. So we do have a big opportunity. And I did just want to show this map, and this doesn't directly answer your question, but maybe kind of related. So just that this is voter participation. This isn't registration. This is who turns out of registered voters. We can see that's not evenly distributed throughout our county. There are areas that have higher turnout rates, and there are areas that have lower turnout rates. It really varies in our county. I gave you some statistics about who typically turns out to vote. Doesn't always look that way, but I think it's just important to know that different communities are going to face different barriers to getting out to vote. So so many barriers are out there. There are language barriers. We'll talk a little bit about barriers related to disabilities and how those are being addressed, and in many cases are not being addressed, and you may be able to share information with me. Often there's lack of outreach. Messages are just shared that are very mainstream and don't target particular populations. People feel really mistrustful of government sometimes, or our country has a history of disenfranchising voters, and so we're still feeling the effects of that. So there are many reasons why people may be facing barriers to vote. I have some statistics about voting in the disability community. So these are from the 2016 election, last major, presidential election. So 16 million people with disabilities voted in that election, and accounted for 1/6 of eligible voters. That's a huge proportion of the voters. Although voter registration is lower by more than 2% for people with disabilities. So, this is just a flag. We need to think about what are some of the barriers. Why is voter registration lower? Yes.
Right. How would you get gathering that information?
Oh, I should list that there. Let me follow up with my source. I think this is. I don't have it in my notes here, but I didn't gather this data. I looked at a report that was written that was done in 2016 after the election.
Right, because my daughter has been participating in voting since she was 18 and votes in every election. However, I don't remember ever having to note that she was autistic.
Oh, this isn't actually from anyone's ballot information, or wasn't taken at the polls. I think it was a research study done by someone looking at the national level. And I can find out more, and I can have Sandy send out to the council just the actual report that was done. I think it was done maybe at Rutgers University, which is on the East Coast, and it was one of the major reports that actually looked at what does voting look like in the disability community. I just wanted to bring these statistics here. It doesn't mean that it applies to everybody. It's not saying that, it's not an accusation at all. It's just kind of, I brought it up because I wanted people to think about what are maybe some of the barriers and how can we think about addressing those barriers to encourage voting.
Jan,
Yeah.
I just want to add, I attended the ARC of California has a public policy conference each year, and a couple of years ago they did it on voting, and I think it's very important for our legislators to know that we are a significant voting bloc. Yeah, so absolutely, I think that's pretty interesting.
Okay. Is it the American Association of People with Disabilities? Is that AAPD?
Yes.
Okay, so that is where I found these statistics, and I'll send it out. They just put together a report. So I think what Sandy said is kind of the takeaway, that people with disabilities are a really important voting bloc, but there are unique barriers faced. And unfortunately, there was a study done about polling places, and maybe this isn't a surprise to people, but by law, polling places must provide accessible voting machines. But there was a study done, and a huge portion of the accessibility measures weren't, when they looked into it, they weren't being put into place, which is definitely a huge problem, and was surprising to me when I saw that. That's something that really does need to be addressed, particularly because if people with disabilities voted at the same rate of people without disabilities who have the same demographic characteristics, we'd have 2.2 million more voters nationwide. I think in our last presidential election, I know that there was less of a margin. the deciding factor was, by less than 2.2 million people. So just some updates. If you didn't know, our state is actually trying to do some things. Yes?
Okay.
Do you want to go back?
I'm going to go back about 4 slides.
4 slides, okay. Which one?
Conservator word.
Oh, the conservatorship, okay.
You call it a dirty word.
It's a, oh,
Debate.
okay.
As, why I bring it up is, are you aware of what's called the SB 35?
That's yes, I have looked into that, of the new changes, yeah.
Because I'm the local representative for both offices here at the Regional Center, for both counties. And was there a informational reason why it, per se, has it increased because there are more registers because of this? Because the long story is still going on, is that it's in a court down in Los Angeles with all the dispute against the conservators claiming the unnecessary reasons.
Are you talking about SB 589? Oh, 35.
It's a voters' preference vote
Okay.
program.
Don't have information about how any of the changes to it's state or federal.
It's state or.
The state, okay, I had looked at, there was like a change in California state law. I didn't look at any data about how those changes in those laws may have increased or decreased voting in the disability community. Do you know, Sandy?
It's still new.
Yeah, it's so brand
Yeah, I
new
don't think
that I
there
was
could
just,
be a study yet.
Yeah,
I think they
Yeah.
let a couple years go by to see how it affects the voting.
And Sandy, do we have this information, or could we send it out after, about the change in the SB 589? That is voting rights under conservatorship? Because there was just a change to the state law that I think actually was in the favor of voting right, ensuring that people really have their right to vote and giving a lot of opportunity for that.
Yes.
Okay.
It's in their packets.
Okay.
Those 4 pages.
Okay. And just to be transparent, I'm really not an expert on conservatorship, so I'm sure that other advocates here are way more experts. But I'm glad that's in the packet. It has a very nice frequently asked questions that if you are interested in that information.
I think the bottom line on that is if a person is conserved, the court actually has to say, oh, you're not competent to vote. Just because you're conserved doesn't mean you have the right
Yes.
to vote. Yes.
Thank you.
this is conserved, right?
Okay. Yes, that seems like the bottom line from the frequently asked questions. Thank you, Sandy, for translating. Okay, so I just quickly wanted to let people know, if you hadn't heard, that this year, as of now, 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register to vote. I think Sandy brought some voter registration forms.
Yes, they're on that little.
Oh, yeah, so they can just fill out a regular voter registration form, and then on their 18th birthday, they're automatically registered to vote. So that's pretty cool. And then I don't know if anyone's been to the DMV recently to get an ID. Oh, no, whenever I bring that up, people are like, I think because the real ID, it's been really crazy. Sorry to bring up a sore subject, but if you are going, or for people who do go, you are now automatically registered to vote unless you actively opt out. So that's another way that the state is encouraging voter registration. Did you have a question?
I have a question
Yes.
for you, and it's complicated, I think.
Okay.
How do I start out? Before the last election, I called, I don't remember who I called, but anyway, I got my name taken off of the jury list. And then when the elections was getting close to the election, my husband no, he didn't either. But my kids got there.
It is linked. If you're registered to vote, then that is linked to.
Yes.
So that's.
Why?
I don't know why. I don't ever bring it up because I feel like it deters. I'm very interested in encouraging voting, and I think people get deterred when they hear that voter registration is linked to getting that dreaded letter in the mail about jury duty. So I don't know why that's linked. I'm not sure. I can't answer that question, but still, you should keep your voter registration. It's way more important to register to vote.
I don't know also why I got this card. I was able to vote last time, and I intend voting
Yes,
this
I think
time.
this is just reminding you. This is evidence of your registration. She got this in the mail.
Oh,
So.
I'm going to keep it then.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So, even though the state is doing some things, honestly. Oh, go ahead.
Do DMV let you know that this is now in effect, that once you come in and you're doing whatever for renewing whatever, that now you're a registered voter? Because it's like, if you go there and they don't tell you, then you don't know that this is even happening.
You know what? I don't know. It's called the Motor Voter Law, so it just recently passed. But has anyone been to the DMV recently? I'd love to.
Yeah, but maybe you simply have to check off
No, you have to opt.
that you want to register.
No, you have to opt out. It's the opposite. They're like capturing everyone, and then you have to opt out. But I don't know what they say to you at the DMV.
Register them.
They ask you if you would like to be registered to vote. Yes,
Oh, they
no,
do?
or opt out.
Oh, okay. I thought they automatically registered you. That's interesting. So she's saying they do ask. I don't have an appointment next month for that real
And
ID.
if you're already registered, then you can opt out.
Okay, yeah,
I would think so.
I think so, or, yeah, I think you would want to say yes, just to ensure that your registration is kept updated. But,
I think someone should look at the script that they're saying to people, because if you're going and don't even know that you're now becoming a registered voter, if you're not, then they're, it's like telling me I want $1 million and I don't know it.
that's true. That could be a good place for advocacy. That's a really good point.
It actually says that it is opt-out now, it's changed.
That's what I had read in the literature, but now I'm hearing from a person that went live to the DMV, said, so, I mean, there may be, just like anything, I just think it's just like we talked about at the polls, what it says when you look at the Secretary of State website, everything is required by law to be accessible to voters, but when you show up there and who's the poll worker and what they do, sometimes it doesn't always fit the script that it's supposed to. So I do think it's a good point that the DMV actually could play a role in maybe doing some engagement and encouragement. But I think overall, probably the most effective way to engage voters, like you're saying, it's not by doing some blanket anonymous thing, it's by using our personal relationships, and the trusted relationships is not, someone standing outside with a petition. It's someone that you trust, talking to you about voting, maybe engaging you in a conversation about what are the barriers you might be facing, or have you registered to vote? Do you have questions about it? And so I think you all, as advocates and members of this council in this room, actually have a really valuable and powerful role. If you are interested in engaging voters, that you could reach out to people and to have those conversations. Yes.
Two questions, two statements. One, you want 16 and 18-year-olds, they know that they can register. Have you approached school districts to let them know that 16 through 18-year-olds can vote, and maybe their social studies teacher, whatever, would be able to get a whole group of students to do that with notification of their parents? And because they're in a civics class, I don't think they call it civics anymore, but they're in one of those supposed classes that are teaching them about government and the responsibility of being a citizen. That would be a great place for them to do. And the second thing about, there seems to be assumptions as to why people don't vote. Having volunteered in other organizations about voting, a lot of it is simply what's the relevance, or what will I see that would be different for my life if I do vote.
People feel like maybe it doesn't make a difference, or they want to know it's
Seen
good.
that it hasn't made a difference or issue.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives an assumption that people don't vote for. I think a lot of the times it may be, how do you make whatever the bill is, whatever the voting, whatever the candidate is, how do you make it relevant to them to make them want to vote?
Absolutely. I think you make two really important points. Just to your second point, I think it really supports this relying on the personal connections, because the people that you're talking to, whether it's a family member, whether it's community residents, so you might know what is relevant to them, or to be able to encourage them in a way that like a general message isn't. Also, I did share, this is some information from the League of Women Voters. It's nonpartisan information about the state level measures on the ballot, and we're going to hear from Darin in a little bit. He's going to talk about some really important measures and how they impact housing. So I think the more that you can get educated about what's on the ballot, and then maybe you can say to someone who says, it doesn't matter, you could maybe bring up, well, there is going to be X issue on the ballot, and I think this would interest you. And then also, particularly in local elections, your vote really does count. So there was a measure on the last ballot in June, Measure A, that would have raised $240 million a year for preschool and pay preschool teachers, and would have eliminated waiting lists for young children to get into education programs, and it lost by 0.02% of the vote, so less than 1,000 votes in Alameda County. And I just bring that up, whatever way you might have felt about that measure, that's a very small margin of the vote. So, and then I think it's a great idea of engaging schools. We're just a small program that works in public health, but hopefully the Registrar of Voters is thinking about that as well. I think I already covered this. There are voter registration forms up here. I just encourage people to take them if you think you want to talk to someone about voting. We could provide more of those forms to you, or you can always get them from the Registrar of Voters. And just, I won't take the time to go over all these things, but you just familiarize yourself. It's actually a very simple form to fill out, and you can help someone that needs help, and there's even a place to write down if the person has received assistance.
And Jen, can I add, we have them in English, Spanish, and Chinese, but back at the office, I think we have every language that you might be interested in.
There's 10 languages, yeah. And it's on the registration form, it lists the 10 languages that the forms come in. So yeah.
If you run out, I do have a whole bunch upstairs.
Oh, okay, so see, we have more all around. Everyone take them, please.
I have a whole case under my desk.
Oh, sorry, that color is really bad. But I did on the slide, I don't know why it came out like that, but I did just want to put some voting rights and resources. Secretary of State's office, Disability Rights Council has a voting rights unit. And then AAPD has a really cool campaign called Rev Up, Register, Educate, Vote, and Use Your Power. So there's lots of stuff going on if you want to get involved in these bigger movements. And I know I've taken up a lot of time, so maybe I should. Okay. Oh, we do? Okay. Do you have any questions? Or if I do have time, I was worried I was taking too much time. If people have questions about the form or registering people to vote, any questions? Yes.
For the November election, somebody, is registration closed?
No. It's open.
What's
And
the last day that people can register and be able to vote in the next election?
October 22nd is the formal date, but in California, you can, if you're not registered to vote, you could still show up to the polls and you can cast what's called a provisional ballot. If you are sure that you are eligible to vote, then you can fill out the ballot. And the thing is, they would just have to check your eligibility. And there's no penalty for registering to vote if you're not sure if you're eligible. You could register, and then if you find out you're not eligible, they may send something to you that says you're not eligible. If you're not eligible, you should not vote. But if you're sure you're eligible and you just haven't registered, that is a nice option. It's better to register ahead of time before October 22nd, but it's great that people don't feel like, oh, I missed it and I have to wait 2 years. So, yeah.
Well, I have a question now about the DMV. If you abstained
Oh.
on that instead of voting yes or no, is there a place to check to see if you're still registered to vote?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. There are many places to check. So one is the Alameda County Registrar of Voters. You can go on there and you can go to my profile, my voter profile, and then you can look up by, I think you have to have the last 4 of your social security or your driver's license number, and then you can look up where is your polling place and if you're registered to vote. And then there's also something called Voter's Edge, where you can look up the same information. Both places, I think, I don't know if it's up yet, but very soon you'll also be able to see your ballot on there. So you could look online and see oh, this is exactly what I'll be voting on, which is really nice because as we know in California, often there's just a lot on the ballot and it's like studying for, cramming for an exam sometimes. So the earlier you can see what's on there, the better. But definitely you can check online if you have internet access. I'm sure you could also call the Registrar of Voters if you weren't comfortable using the websites and speak to someone who may be able to help check your voter registration. Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question about accessible polling places.
Yes.
It's like I know that Alameda's been notorious for not having them.
Yeah.
And so if a person is registered to vote and they can't get there, it shouldn't happen during that day, but I'm wondering if there's a way that we can get information on what places, and then maybe take a look at those locations to make sure they're accessible first. But then if we can't be there, can we change our voting from a polling place to mail it?
Yeah, so you can definitely online or by indicating on a voter registration form, you can opt to vote by mail. And not just for people with disabilities, for anybody, I always recommend to sign up to vote by mail because you get your ballot in the mail. If you have an accessible place to get mail, you get the ballot 3 weeks in advance, you can fill it out at your leisure, you can mail it back, or on election day, you can actually take it to any polling place. So it's really helpful to do that. I think you'd have to talk to the registrar of voters because they're honestly supposed to have accessible voting equipment at every place. So it's not like there's a list, but I know that hasn't been the case. So I don't know the ins and outs of how you could go check out places. Yes.
Last year I tried to take my absentee. I missed the date of when I was supposed to mail my absentee in.
Yeah.
I tried to take it to one of the booths. So I had to go in and out, and then I had to go to the post office and send it.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. On election day, if your ballot is filled out and in the envelope, you're supposed to be able to drop it off at any polling place. So that should be your right to do that. Maybe you were given some misinformation. That's unfortunate.
And you can go to any polling place. It doesn't have to be yours,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, and actually now you do not have to bring your own ballot. Somebody can bring it for you. That's a change. It's like a third-party return. I think you have to sign the back of your ballot, but they used to ask if, but anybody can drop it off for you. Other questions? These are all really good questions. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
My name is Stephen Beard. I'm a real estate agent for people with disabilities and their families, and part of the council.
All right. Anyone else? Yes?
I'm Dean Shapiro. I'm a board member, RCB. I'm a board member of RCB.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a OCC board.
CAC member for RCB.
Yeah, I'm that too. And I'm hoping to become on the DD Council.
All right. Anyone else? Yes.
Chris Hansen, Regional Center of the East Bay, Associate Director for Adult Services.
Thanks, Chris.
And I just want to mention, I know Chris and Stephen got caught in the traffic, because most of it's deputy
We good?
traffic, but I do want you to know that Chris brought homemade goodies and treats.
All right. Chris, I was snack person a couple years ago, and I showed up late here because I got everything there on time to the public health. All right. Can you hear me okay? We're good on the mic? Great.
Yeah, I think we still got 2 more people in the back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, introduce yourself if you came in after introductions. And Ron called you out. It's not me. All right. Oh.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Lizziari, Director of Operations for Long-Term Care, and I represent Provider Vendor Advisory Committee.
Great, thanks. All right.
Pam Pearls, State Counsel, RAC, and EBS.
Anyone else we need to call out? 'Cause that's what it seems to have turned into. It's not a volunteer thing anymore. Great. So I'm here to just briefly present on a couple of statewide ballot measures as well as a local ballot measure that are linked to funding for affordable housing. So in November 2018, all of us who are registered to vote, right? Well, I won't ask. I won't ask. That's your personal thing. I noticed you didn't ask too. Yes, we hope everyone is. Please take some time to get to know these ballot measures. Please ask questions if you have them. If I don't have the answers today, I will get the answers for you. This is just really critical that you understand what these measures are all about. In the next next several weeks, you're going to start getting information. Some of it will be true, and some will not. I mean, that's how these things work. And it's really important to make sure that you're actually getting back to the language on the ballot measures to get your truest understanding of what they mean. So I'm giving you a biased opinion today, and I'm going to be right straight out about that. I want you to vote for these things, but it is your decision. So on the statewide propositions, we have two, Proposition 1 and Proposition 2. Proposition 1 is the Veterans and Affordable Housing Act. This one started as a legislative item by Senator Jim Bell, and then the legislature decided to make it a ballot proposition versus them voting on it and trying to get it past the governor, which he's been stingy on these types of things in the past. Proposition 2 is No Place Like Home. It's basically, how many of you guys remember the Mental Health Services Act, Prop 63 from about 15 years ago? And the Millionaire's Tax is what it was also called. So this is Proposition 2 is merely an allocation of those funds, and I'll get more into the detail. Both propositions present, and pardon the typo here, they present an unprecedented opportunity to generate revenue for the production of affordable housing in California. And combined, it's a package of $6 billion for affordable housing. And it sounds like a tremendously large number. Whenever the B word comes up, it's, oh my goodness. It's still not enough to meet the production needs of the state, because we're so far behind in as far as development of all types of housing, not just affordable. And both of these bond measures only require a simple majority to pass. That's 50% plus one. That's not typical. A lot of times when these bond measures come up, they require 2/3, so 66.67% plus one. And so this is a great opportunity to actually get these through. Prop 1, Veterans and Affordable Housing Act, will have $4 billion in general obligation bond dollars to create supportive housing and homeowner assistance programs. General obligation bonds are public debt. So the state is taking out bonds that they will then have to pay back to fund this. So that's one of the key components of the thing that you should understand. That means that the state is taking on this obligation. And before that, if that's scary, just please understand that that's how states fund things. They use general obligation bonds all the time. The other form of bonds that they often utilize are revenue bonds, and that's where they connect some kind of source to feed the bond, and then the bond is allocated as per the proposition. Those are the main two types. General obligation, again, is debt. Revenue bond is they're raising the money. So that's kind of as simple as I can make it, and I know it's kind of cloudy. So do you have questions about that? And I have a lot more information on general obligation bonds that I can share with someone offline if they want. Yep.
Also, people can look at like a short summary of these in the.
Excellent. Oh yeah, in the packet, these also are summarized. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jennifer. One point of that $4 billion, $1.5 billion will go to the multifamily housing program. That's a program that has been utilized over the years, the last 15 to 20 years, very well to create supportive housing. And supportive housing is typically housing that's subsidized and funded to make it affordable to people at 30% of area median income and below. And how many of you know where the area median income of someone on an SSI income of less than $900? That's what is it? Like 18%, and it's continually going down because incomes are going up while SSI has been fairly flat. So that's a really great tool for targeting those very extremely low income, is what that's called. This property right here, that's Lincoln Oaks and Fremont, that has MHP dollars in it. And I mean, without those dollars, that building would not exist. One other great thing about the multifamily housing program is that it hasn't been funded for a very long time. So we haven't had this tool in the box. But the other great thing is they actually recognize the regional center system. They explicitly call out regional center system, Landerman Act, as part of the points competition of having services funding. So it's recognizing that in our community, we have a specific system that makes sure that everybody has the services they need to live in the property, and we're not, as developers, required to go and fundraise for services dollars, which is a huge, huge benefit. The Landerman Housing Alliance, LHA, is advocating for an intellectual and developmental disability preference in this measure. We advocated for it while it was a bill with Senator Bell, and we've continued that advocacy, and we will continue doing that once it passes, knock wood, and that and then we'll continue to work on it as they're setting up the program requirements, because with that preference, that just boosts our ability to raise the funds, but also for developers who plan to use those dollars to come to us to bring our folks in. In July, it was polling at 74% approval. I don't have a more recent number, unfortunately, but that's great. That's a pretty good margin to get us to 50% plus one. Before I go on, I'm going to check my notes real quick. Okay, I think I got what I needed. Yes.
I was looking at the League of Women Voters that you passed out, and in Prop 1, the against said Prop 1 would only provide housing for a small number of people. If that's your only argument, then that's the weakest argument I've ever heard. Because if it provides for one person to get them off the streets,
Yeah.
then it's worth it. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yep.
If that's your strongest against it, then
And that's why it's polling very positively. I mean, this is obvious. The housing issue is affecting everybody in California right now. There's no one immune. You either are affected by it yourself, or someone you care for is affected by it. Families are being spread, and folks are having to leave their community, potentially the state, because of the housing situation. So that is probably all they have. I think we're going to be fine, but you never know what you're going to see on TV and in the flyers leading up to November. So again, just educate yourself, and most importantly, educate everyone you know. Make sure that they're spreading the word. Yes, Dahlia?
In the title of it says veterans, so is it preference? Are they the preference?
That's one of the preference populations. Homelessness is another preference within there, but it's also people with disabilities, and that's why as the LHA, we're advocating to get that finer tuned, to have a specific amount of funds actually for intellectual and developmental disabilities, not just generally disabilities, because we won't benefit as much until we get that language. Stephen?
Darin, you say that $1.5 billion is set aside for multifamily.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other designations in the bill?
Yep. So there are another $150 million for transit-oriented development. So basically points for co-locating near transit hubs, which is also a great benefit for our folks, who very few of them drive. And it also it's a great benefit for developers, because you can also now not have to supply as many parking spaces. You can actually have housing units instead of car housing, and you get more density and more bang for the buck. There's also $300 million for local housing trust fund matching grants for pilot programs to demonstrate innovative cost-saving approaches to creating affordable housing, and that's very vague, but it's also one of the ways that we always get our foot in the door, because we're able to say, hey, here, why don't we do this mixed income, mixed population housing, and maybe some seniors with some folks with IDD and blah blah blah. Those are the types of ways we can get some projects on the ground and then get them funded in the future too. Get them replicated. Wandra?
Of the monies that will be realized from when this passes, or hopefully when it passes.
When?
How much is designated, how much, this may sound selfish, but how much would you be assured would come to our?
We don't know right now. That's what the LHA has been working on. We actually, the LHA did not support the bill. We supported with amendment, and Senator Bell he was upset with us for that, taking that position, and we tried to explain to him, our position is this is sound. We don't want to be left out. We want to be called out. So that conversation continues. He's listening, and he will drive a lot of the writing of the program guidelines when this passes. But by then, we'll also have moved on to more of the administrative level folks in the state, and our arguments will not be political; they'll just be factual. Should be good. Yes, Herb?
Okay. Does any of this funding go towards affordable housing? Would be the deal about the housing program, voucher program?
Not to vouchers. And in my HCB report, I'll provide some updates on some voucher programs that are coming down the pike. But this does not affect, this is capital, this is for development. It's the bricks and mortar hard costs. Anybody else? Okay, I'm gonna move on to Proposition 2, the No Place Like Home. Again, this is Mental Health Services Act dollars, and those dollars have already been passed, and they continue. How many of you are paying the millionaire's tax? All right, congratulations. It's the tax everyone wants to pay. It's 1 cent on every dollar over $1 million, not in net worth, but in earnings. So those folks that are earning, so if someone earned $1,001, they pay 1 cent towards this tax. Thankfully, we've got a lot of millionaires and billionaires in this state who are paying this and they don't feel it. And the opposition back in the day for Prop 63 was all that capital, all those people are going to leave the state. And that's not. More have moved in, willing to pay that 1 penny on $1 over $1 million. And it's been a great source. And it's something that actually the DDS and HCD, Housing and Community Development, have been talking about potentially doing replicating that bond concept for intellectual and developmental disabilities. That would be a ways down the road, but those conversations are happening because this passed, no one feels it, and we should probably do it again. And we'll be building on that once the strategic framework comes out from LHA, or from the DD Council. Yes?
It's sad when the disabled are on the homeless because they've managed to become a homeless and disabled at the same time. And they're a veteran or whatever they are. They can't, they live on the streets, they live on the benches, they live anywhere.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the beauties of this. Sorry if I cut you off, but it's creating the housing units, but there are funds on the other side of this to support and provide the supportive services for those folks. So it's not just get you housed and good luck, I hope you make it. It's get you housed plus providing all the support you need to stay there and stay and improve your quality of life. So one of the specific language in this is authorizing $2 billion in the previously appropriated funding, that was a revenue bond, to construct affordable housing for those experiencing chronic homelessness, people with disabilities. So another very broad statement, but this is new. This is an added piece from the MHSA Mental Health Services Act piece, and those living with mental illness, which means we now have access. Now, what will happen is when this passes, each county will set up their administrative plan for how they're going to utilize their funds. And that's where the advocacy is going to really kick in. We're going to have to be talking with the public health folks in Alameda and Contra Costa County to make sure that they're including disabilities beyond severe mental illness. And at that point, again, we've been having these conversations with counties for 15 years since Prop 63 passed. Alameda and Contra Costa specifically did not include IDD in their plans, and because they're like, well, that's, you guys take care of that, we'll take care of this. But in Alameda County specifically, because of the work of the Schreiber Center, the public health and regional center systems now have a much more collegial relationship. There's a recognition that folks can live with both of these situations, these issues, and that we should benefit from this as well, our folks. Actually, let's see, make sure I've got all my points. Yes?
What are the definitions of homelessness in order to qualify
Well,
for a lot of these propositions?
chronic homelessness is you have to be it has to be long and enduring time on the streets. Streets, shelters, and other places not fit for human habitation. Not all of these, chronic homelessness isn't necessarily required, it's a preference. So within the IDD community, we don't track homelessness very well. That's been recognized by ARCA, by Lanterman Coalition, and all that. I think we're going to get better with that, and that data, while it's not we don't want to, well, let me change. We know there are chronically homeless folks with developmental disabilities. The problem is when someone's chronically homeless, they tend to not be connected to services any longer. It's harder to stay connected. And so while we have people who have dropped off, that might be one of those conditions that cause that. And the system isn't really set up to bring them back in, or that outreach piece. It's a completely different setup than from like mental health. And so we have a huge challenge around this, but there's a recognition that the issue exists. So I think now we just have to work towards a solution. Does that answer that? We do have folks, and we need to get them in as fast as possible. And we have to figure out how to put all those pieces together. Double check. I think I covered. Yes.
So this may be too far ahead, but have they come up with a possible plan on how to address it? The homelessness piece. If this does pass.
Within DDS or within here?
Within.
This is established. The public health departments and the behavioral health departments across the state, which are county-based, they've been doing this for 15 years.
Uh-huh.
So it's well established. Most of the MHSA dollars in the past have flowed directly to serious mental illness and chronic homelessness, and those are the two things. If you have them, check, you're eligible. We have not been able to get in the door advocating for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who may have co-occurring mental illness and homelessness. That's been our challenge. But as I mentioned, in Alameda County, we have an advantage. Is now there's dialogue, there's a cooperative center, there's an understanding that these things coexist.
Right.
So.
Well, the reason why I asked you that, because you see on the news and in the newspaper all the time about the tough sheds that are purchased. I think Libby Schaff did that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they put it out there, but a lot of the homeless people don't want to live there.
Well, they're filled, so.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, never mind.
They're filled.
I just have heard that. Okay.
Yeah, no, there's vocal folks against them that don't, and that's their choice.
Right.
But they're, every bed's filled.
Okay. And so with this funding, if they are living in those homes,
they would be eligible to move into a permanent housing option. A tough shed is temporary.
Okay,
It's an emergency shelter option. It's not this.
Okay.
It's a stopgap below. All right, and full disclosure, HCB will be operating the Tough Shed community at the Lake Merritt, the one at the Henry J. Kaiser Convention Center in the next couple months. So I'm biased there too. And I don't think we'll have any problem filling 40 beds. Fortunately, we actually need more. Yeah.
Darin, you're not going to talk about Prop 5 or 10?
I'm not today. Anyone else? Okay. So these are local measures. Measure O is in Berkeley. Measure H, Santa Cruz. Napa County has a transient occupancy tax on their ballot. Measure V in Santa Cruz, in the city of Santa Cruz. And then Santa Rosa Housing and Fire Recovery Package are the main local measures that we'll be seeing. I'm only focusing on Measure O, Berkeley, because we're the Alameda County Developmental Disabilities Council. How many of you live in Berkeley and vote in Berkeley? How many of you know people who live and vote in Berkeley? All right. So all the more reason, get this information out, make sure people hear it, make sure that they have what they need to make their decision. Measure O in Berkeley will create a general obligation bond for the city of $135 million. It was approved by the Berkeley City Council, and then they pushed it to the ballot because that's how that Berkeley operates. Anything where they would be taking on debt has to go in front of the voters, which is appropriate. The money would be used for acquisition or improvement of real property. It's for extremely low, very low, low income and workforce housing. So it's along the spectrum. It's 30% of AMI, 50% of AMI, 80% of AMI, up to 100% of AMI. It will require a 2/3 majority, so 66.67 plus 1. And in August, some research had it at 74% support, which is great, strong support, but that margin between 67 and 74 is much tighter. And Berkeley's a highly political place, and it's going to be a nail biter, I think. One of the things that's really important is that there is this recognition of need to fund housing at extremely low. They're mostly thinking about homelessness, but our folks also would qualify based on income. Yes?
I have a question about why some of these measures are 50% or something like that.
Yeah.
And this one like is 66.
Yep.
What makes the difference?
So typically, if Prop 1, for instance, back to Jim Bell's bill that became a proposition, if it hadn't been voted on by the legislature to put it on the ballot, if it had come up through signatures, it's another way that propositions come on, it would have been at 66.67 to pass. But because it came from the legislature, it was dropped to a 50% plus 1 threshold. Prop 2 is a revenue, it's not creating more funds, it's actually allocating funds that were already voted on and approved. So that one didn't have to go up to the higher threshold. This one is the city of Berkeley requires this for any time that the city would assume debt on a bond measure. They require that the vote be at 66.67. And that's typical. Most jurisdictions require that same thing. Okay, does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Thalia.
This says for acquisition of property, but it doesn't have any funding for building.
Well, improvement.
So that's considered.
Yeah, that's the language they used, and that's, the improvements are everything you put on top of that land. This is not enough money to do a bunch, so it's going to be money leveraging other money. So this $135 million might go to acquiring a property in the city of Berkeley, and then back here, using some of this $1.5 billion to build it, or using some of this $2 billion to build it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So the city of Berkeley already has, through the CIL, a housing rehabilitation program, and it's not that well funded. Could some of that $135 million go towards funding that program better, so folks can get ramps and bathroom lawns and stuff like
It's
that?
possible. I don't know the exact answer, but the language of using improvement could be part of that. It could be part of a rehab that could fund that program. I'm not completely clear. I don't know if their intent was to fund other programs or to just really fund real estate. Anything else? So these are additional resources, a great place to get updates on these bonds. Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California and Housing California. And as well as any legislation that we'll be seeing in this next legislative session, which will probably be pretty exciting, considering Tony Atkins is still in leadership. We'll have a new governor who, and assuming it's Mr. Newsom is very much, he's affordable housing minded. I don't think he will be as rainy day fund minded, so maybe not as fiscally conservative as Governor Brown. Governor Brown, his rainy day fund is actually a brilliant way to run a state. Unfortunately, we took the brunt of it. And so I think we're gonna have a different dynamic come this next legislative session. Yes, Steve.
So you didn't have time to deal with it today, but I really would encourage everyone to look into some of the property tax measures rent control measures coming up this fall. There's a statewide proposition on rent control, which is a huge, and there are several in Berkeley and Oakland and other local cities around Alameda County. And I think everyone should really be really careful about it because you're going to get inundated with propaganda about it. But it isn't clear to me that these measures around rent control are necessarily going to be good, like getting more rent control is necessarily going to be good for our people.
This will be a great place to access information about those measures as well as the local stuff, the statewide and local. This is more of a statewide look. Yes, Dina.
I'm from Contra Costa, and if that rent control happens where I am, people who are on Section 8 or low-cost income, that housing thing, that's going to really hurt because some people can't even live in some of the areas in the central area. We have to move outwards.
And if and I'll take this back to exec committee, but I can put together some materials on those local, the state and local bonds related to rent control as well. This was about finance dollars, and either presented as a mini presentation or just materials to hand out the next meeting. And again, they will, but I would pull from the other sources. Mine will be much more biased. I'm just being very clear. Will?
I think the other thing that would be helpful for our folks is clearly, the League of Women Voters tried, but it's still not very consumer-friendly. It's not in language. The interesting thing is it was actually consumer-friendly language. We'd probably get higher voter turnout because people could read it and understand it. Most of the propositions people look at like, I don't know, because it's written in legalese, it's written in all that. So anything we can do to help, especially on ones that we want to support, and propositions are things that nonprofits and associations like this can take positions on because they're not people. It's
Go for it.
So you have the ability to actually advocate it.
There's still limits, but you can that's a lot of work you can dedicate to. I totally agree. The League of Women Voters piece is there's a difference between an education piece and an advocacy piece, and that's so. When I'll go through and do more of an advocacy piece, like this is what it will mean for our community versus the legalese that's sitting in the text as well already. Yes. Hey, Paul.
Question. It was like pertaining to what you just said, but how come when you're looking at the propositions, and I do use the League of Women Voters a lot, but how come it is on the legal thing where it's really hard to understand and people want a better voter turnout while everybody's working and they haven't got the time to try to figure out this, and why isn't, I mean, you don't have to dumb it down, but why isn't it made more simpler, like, not advice at all?
No, well, no disrespect to Ms. Pearls, but they're written by attorneys.
Yeah, but you said the general public.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point because I've been hard pressed to find nonpartisan information that is just easily understandable and also short. I think it can be daunting to get not just League of Women Voters, but the booklet that you get in the mail is absolutely overwhelming. So there's definitely a need for it. Sounds like maybe your council will be working on something that will be useful for your community.
But it'll be partisan.
Yeah.
That's
We're limited. We always use League of Women Voters because that's honestly the simplest language with nonpartisan.
Yep. And then but we need to go another step, and we'll do that for our community. Dina?
The language is, some of us haven't had a high education, only maybe to high school or so, or to small colleges. Some of us can't understand some of the bigger stuff. Some of us can only understand the smaller stuff, and some of us don't have, it's totally confusing when they put the bigger stuff in front of the smaller stuff. And then how do you fix out what is what?
Mm-hmm.
We need to tell our legislators that not only do all people benefit from universal access, all people would benefit from plain language that should be part of translation. Absolutely.
Great. And all good points. Said plain language. That's a big take back. Yes, Thalia?
So if you're having problems with the language, you should approach people that you trust and ask them to help explain that proposition to you so that you can understand it. That's why it's great to reach out to people you trust because they can help and also say, yes, this is too frustrating for me too. Be able to put it in simple words for you. So
Yeah.
it's very good to reach out to people you trust and ask them questions about what's on the ballot.
These are great kitchen table conversations if you can avoid yelling at each other. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's take 5 minutes. We've got. We'll get back together at high noon. I'm sorry, at high 11.